Well, hey, everybody. This is Kathryn Fantauzzi. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Apollo Neuroscience. I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar. I think we're going to wait just a second while a few more people join, and then we'll get kicked off. Okay, a lot of people are hopping in. So we're excited to get started. I'm going to start by introducing you to our guests. So I'm Kathryn. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Apollo Neuroscience. And with me today is my co-host, Shyamal Patel, who's the head of science at OURA. And Shyamal leads an interdisciplinary organization. He's focused on research and development of algorithms that translate sensor data from the OURA ring. If you guys aren't familiar, the OURA ring is this biometric tracking ring. And he's passionate about building digital health solutions that enable the transformation of healthcare. And with us also is Dr. Halland Chen. Halland is the longevity doctor. Dr. Halland is a double board certified physician. He excelled in pioneering methods to expedite healing and to enhance overall well-being. And his expertise is widely recognized and celebrated, encompassing a spectrum of domains, including longevity, nicotinamide, adenine, NAD, stem cell research, anti-aging strategies, and innovative non-invasive approaches to pain alleviation and injury rehabilitation. And also, with us, hopefully later, is Dr. Josh Axe, who is really focused on nutrition, physical health, and longevity. So the topic at hand here for us to discuss, which I'm really excited about, is this intersection of stress, the stress epidemic, chronic stress on the body, and its relationship to aging, longevity, and health span. And the intersection of what we can now do with wearable technology to actually understand stress and actually how to understand how the things that we are doing change our resilience to it and change our overall readiness and our resilience. Because let's face it, stress happens. And if you're a normal person, you're going to experience it daily, right? And so I think the first thing to unpack here is what's stress. And so stress isn't always bad, right? Like walking up a hill or riding your bike or, even preparing for something like a competition or something that's mentally challenging isn't always a bad thing, right? Being stressed is important for building resilience, for building strength. Just like, if you think about lifting weights, the first time you lift a weight, you're not going to be able to lift very much. But if you practice and recover, and give yourself the sleep and recovery in between, you'll build muscle. And so ultimately stress is awesome. But in some cases, stress can be challenging. And that's really when there isn't enough resilience in the body, when there isn't enough recovery to handle the stress. And so on the physical side, that's when you'll see something happen where you'll get a physical injury, or on the mental stress, it's when you won't be able to think clearly. And everybody kind of knows that emotional feeling of feeling overwhelmed, feeling foggy, and not being able to make a decision. And the short-term stuff we're probably aware of, a wild statistic from the American Psychological Association. Hey, Josh, Dr. Axe has joined us. Welcome. We just got started. The American Psychological Association noted that 77% of Americans, so more than 3/4 of Americans, are so stressed out that they get physical symptoms from it, so that they are actually physically showing symptoms of stress. And that can be all sorts of things. But why would there be physical manifestations when we think of stress as something emotional? And it's because your body doesn't really care, right? Your body doesn't really care if you're mentally stressed or physically stressed. Stress is stress. And in the short term, you can cope with it. But in the long term, if not regulated, if your body isn't supported to recover from it, if you don't have the balance of the things to help your body bounce back, that's when we start to see what we call disease, right? And that's when you start to see inflammation in the body that can cause all sorts of downstream consequences, metabolic disorder. And even when you think about stress, like an environmental stress, food can cause inflammation, the wrong kinds of food, not getting enough sleep causes inflammation, and in the end, you end up not feeling so hot. And so with all of that to be understood, we now have a lot of ways to understand stress that we didn't have before. Before we just had subjective feeling. Now we can track it, frankly, on the DNA level. There's studies being shown on the epigenetic level that stress actually changes our gene expression. But without having to get a battery of gene tests and blood tests, there's other things you can do with wearables that already exist on the market. And so, and things that you can do to track your well-being to support you in basically understanding what's going on with your body so that you can start to make meaningful changes to support your recovery. And so with that, I'd like to start with Dr. Shyamal, Dr. Patel, but we're going to call him Shyamal, the head of science over at OURA Ring. So OURA Ring, for you guys that don't know about OURA Ring is a wearable tracker that you wear on your hand. And there's a lot of trackers, right? There's Apple Watch, there's Whoop, there's other wearables. But one thing I notice about the OURA brand is that you guys focus a lot on readiness, on recovery from strain and from readiness. And so, and you've recently launched a new metric around actually tracking stress, which seems like a really logical evolution of the things that you guys have been really focused on in terms of how you present this information to the people who wear your ring. And so I'm wondering, what goes into if you buy an OURA Ring, what goes into understanding readiness? And also, why does readiness matter so much in the context of stress and health span?
Yeah, thank you, Kathryn, for that introduction and a wonderful sort of setup for this webinar. Stress is such an important topic, like it's something that is, every single person experiences. So it's something that we think a lot about at OURA. As you know, OURA started about 10 years ago, and we were the first, I think, company that was like really, focused on sleep and understanding sleep. So when I think about sleep, I think of it as this sort of invisible. And what I mean by that is this sort of 1/3 of our life that we, spend in that state. And we know very little. I think even subjectively, our subjective perception of sleep is quite flawed, actually. There are a lot of studies that have shown that. And also on the data front, until recently, we did not really have tools that helped us understand how we are sleeping. I think at OURA, one of our first steps was let's make this invisible into a visible, and sort of both help you, empower you with data so you understand what is happening objectively in terms of the quality and quantity of sleep you're getting, but then also introduce this moment of reflection in the morning where you think about how you slept and subjectively assess, like, how did I sleep last night? And I think that for me is the single most powerful thing you can do about your health, is actually become aware and sort of mindful about your health. And then I think you can act on it, right? And data is always great to support that. So readiness sort of emerged from that, right? A good night's sleep is directly contributing to how ready you feel for the day. So if you look at how we construct our readiness metric, sleep is a really important factor, your activity, and also your physiology. So it's a really interesting mix of aspects that essentially contribute to how ready you are to take on the day. Now, stress is I think about it as the flip side, right? Sleep is our biggest window of recovery during the day, and stress is sort of that experience that we have throughout the day. Like we are experiencing, as you articulated, different types of stressors. There are good stressors, there are bad stressors, and our day is sort of a reflection, a collection of these. And stress I like to think of as this sort of visible invisible. Because stress is something that I think we all experience. We talk about how stressed we are, or I'm relaxed, or I'm happy. Like those are all things that I think we acknowledge and experience. And I think subjectively, all of us have some level of perception of it. But what has been missing until recently is sort of an objective understanding of, so what does my physiology tell us, right? It is telling me from a stress perspective. Stress starts at sort of the molecular level. Your hormones like cortisol and adrenaline that come into play and sort of start regulating your body, preparing your body to deal with different types of stressors, and then to your sort of experience of stress, what you're experiencing, whether it's good stress or bad stress. And so what we're doing with tracking stress. It's really surfacing up what is happening at the physiological level, and overlaying that with what you're experiencing, right? So that contextual aspect of, was that a good stressor? Was that something that was a negative experience? That is your context that you can overlay on the data about stress, and that can help you connect the dots, so sort of making that visible invisible into a visible. So that's sort of the intent, and you alluded to this idea of resilience, right? At the end of the day, at least in my case, I typically cannot do too much about the types of stressors that I experience, whether, I think I can do a little bit more about the good stressors. Maybe I can introduce more exercise or more mindfulness moments, but some of the maybe things that I would describe as negative stressors are things that are not necessarily in my control. And so the idea of resilience is really important, because it's an empowering way of thinking about stress. That the idea that you can actually get better, you can become more resilient, so you can sort of, be more ready to deal with stressors and challenges. And so that's something I'm really excited about. As I feel like, when we introduced this idea of readiness several years ago, that was sort of the first time, we were thinking about how that aspect is important to think about. And resilience is sort of a new concept that we're introducing in the way that, how do you objectively understand where you are in terms of your resilience?
Yeah, well said. Thank you. And I think one of the things that really goes into the readiness score, besides, so presenting information about how ready people are for the day, is based on sleep and sleep quality, right? Sleep duration and quality, and also people's heart rate variability. Am I missing another key factor?
Yeah, so your sleep duration, your sleep quality, your activity levels, how active you've been, your heart rate variability, your resting heart rate. So there are three big elements: your sleep, your physiology, and the activity levels, like how active you've been relative to your baseline. So everything that we do in OURA is kind of focused on understanding what your baseline is, right? Sort of like, there is no, we've kind of pushing back against this notion of some kind of a normal, what normal health looks like, because I don't think there is anything like a normal health. Every person has their own sort of norm. And so we try to index the insights, the information to what is sort of what your normal looks like, right? And sort of give you insights on that. So that's embedded also within the idea of readiness.
Got it. Yeah. And so when we think about readiness, right, there's a balance in the body, right? Like you said, a regular average person, you, me, anybody that doesn't live on a beach somewhere, is essentially going to experience stress, right? We're going to be late to meetings. We're going to have too many things to do. We're going to have a lot of obligations and things to balance. Part of living a active life, right, is that stress happens. Stress isn't really the bad. I mean, some stress isn't good, but, and having stress that's not well managed isn't good. But I think the focus of understanding your readiness, and then the tools that we have at hand to actually make these steps to improve our recovery from stress, is what makes the difference of being able to cope and to perform well throughout your life and to be happy and fulfilled, versus to kind of decompensate and end up being sick, enter a state of disease. And so the things you're focused on really heavily here are stress management, so mindfulness, right? Exercise, big one. When we talk to Dr. Axe, we're definitely going to talk about nutrition. And then there's the sleep and the recovery. And sleep is so fundamental to regulating the nervous system, to giving the body a chance to bounce back and recover, that you really need all of the elements. And so when we focus on heart rate variability, in terms of longevity, I just wanted to point out that there's actually a new article that came out recently, published in Frontier, that showed that, so that, everybody knows about blue zones, they know about centenarians, these people that live to be 100. And there can be a debate, right? Longevity versus health span. But we're talking about healthy people who live a long time, right? Not just somebody who lives forever, but someone who lives well for a long time. And what they found is that the people who lived to 100 had markedly higher heart rate variability than people who died sooner. And so what is that showing us, right? Someone who is recovered from stress, who is resilient, lasts longer in a better state. And so with us is Dr. Halland, and Dr. Halland is a longevity expert. I only read about a quarter of your bio, very impressive. And so I wanted to know from you, I mean, this is something you really focus on in concierge medicine and functional medicine. How do you work with your patients to understand all of this data, and how are you using it in your practice to help people understand, what it is, what actions they need to take to improve their well-being?
Great. Well, thanks for the introduction. Hi, I'm Dr. Holland, everybody. Very nice to be here and talk with everyone. And, we use a lot of data, in a traditional practice. You might have some normal lab work, but it goes way beyond just blood. You can do things like measuring stool for microbiome, saliva, urine metabolites to see how your hormones are doing. And then I think the next frontier is actually this digital data, right? I wear an Oura ring and I've been doing this for years, and I've just been able to track my progress over time. And so we have a very favorite saying, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? And so having real-time data, unlike having to go to a physician office or getting blood work, this is great because you can actually take actionable steps on something that just happened yesterday or even happening right now. So in our practice, we definitely integrate Oura Ring. We also recommend wearables like Apollo because it does give people that extra insight. And I think anytime you want to do any sort of habit formation, it's the first thing is, do I have insight? Because awareness is one of the first keys in actually making change. And so actually getting things like your sleep data, if you're not getting enough deep sleep, which is more that recovery side of things, that's going to help us a lot. And for people who are new to what HRV stands for, that stands for heart rate variability. That's that dynamic balance between rest and digest and fight or flight. So when our body is sleeping, we're more on the rest and digest side. We're healing, we're letting our body recover. And when we're in fight or flight, that's when we're active throughout the day. Now, some people live in chronic fight or flight because they're chronically stressed. And so there's a combination of good stress and bad stress, right? The good stress is called eustress. We need that. It keeps us, it allows us to push, but too much bad stress can also be counterproductive for longevity. So it's a bit of a balance. We use a lot of the data because it's really about creating lasting change for people and giving them that insight of things that are going wrong outside of what I call your traditional medicine, which is more of a sick care model, right? You have diabetes, you have high blood pressure, you have liver disease or, dysfunction. But most of us live in that gap between not sick, right? And so I think this not sick gap is really what we call longevity. And I always like to tell people it's not about living to 120. It's about having this healthy amount of years up until the final end.
Love to jump in here with a question, if that's okay, Kathryn.
Of course, go for it.
Yeah, I'd love to sort of, kind of unpack about, Dr. Holland, how you approach this sort of, multidimensional view into health and sort of this holistic approach, right? Sort of holistic, proactive, preventative approach. I think this is the future, right? This is where, the future of healthcare will look like. And I feel like a lot of the lessons and, approaches that you're developing in your practice will be translated and brought to scale. So I'm really keen to understand, what does this process look like, right? When you work with somebody, how do you take all these data streams and how do you kind of layer and stack them to understand somebody's health and then sort of, use them throughout, their health journey?
Well, in our practice, we actually used a lot of digital dashboards. So there's a platform called Biocanic. And the great part is that it integrates all your wearable devices into one platform. So instead of just using an app, you can actually see everything tracked in its own charts and graphs. The neat part about that is it also pulls in your lab, so you can actually just filter out the abnormal labs. So we have reports that are 100 pages long, and it's very hard to dissect the trends when you're going between three reports. They're each 50 pages long, and then you're trying to find the trend. So I think digital dashboards are a big thing. With the advent of a lot of AI, everyone knows about ChatGPT now. I think that's going to be a big factor into it. I think when you combine the wearable data with the lab data, that's really the power, right? So for example, if you're adjusting your gut microbiome and you're producing, and this is more for, Dr. Axe to talk about, especially the nutrition side of things, food is medicine. We're going to very heavily see how the food affects even your sleep scores or your ability to relax and have stress. And then you combine that with now, Apollo is integrating with, OURA, how they can interact. And so I think the key to anything in health is to have some sort of digital dashboard, digital feedback loop, which kind of creates this automation because our lives are so busy already. We were actually, before we jumped onto it, we are talking about just, I was talking about my supplement routine, and I just have these stacks right here. But if I don't put this in this, my supplement routine is gone for the day. And so it's just, what are these things that gives us these reminder systems? And I think a digital platform is probably the way this is going to go. And in one aspect, we do a very boutique concierge practice. The whole goal is to scale everything. So what we learn, I do a lot of research as well. What we learn on the research level, how do we scale it? And that's really through automation and tech.
Yeah, I think your supplement example is great. I find one of the most effective approaches to, sort of incorporating health and healthy behaviors is making these small changes, right? Making these micro changes and nudges and introducing these things in a way that make it convenient and easy to adopt these behaviors and healthy habits. I've been using Apollo for several weeks now, and I think one of the things that it does for me is brings this moment of mindfulness throughout my day, right? So whenever it starts vibrating and buzzing, and I'm sure there are these physiological benefits that are coming. Kathryn, you and team do some really amazing science to validate and make sure that how your product is effective. But one of the most powerful thing it does for me is brings this moment of awareness, and that I see that in my data as well. I see that my HRV during the daytime has been higher than before. I started using Apollo. One question I have for you, Kathryn, I think your Apollo is very sort of science grounded, very focused on like validation, making sure that there is some rigorous science around it. How do you approach sort of this sort of I guess not the trade-off, but sort of this balance between focusing on outcomes and science and translational work versus like thinking about engagement and driving more sort of are those two very much aligned for you, or do you see some sort of tension in that balance?
So remarkably, no, I don't see tension. And so to your point, Shyamal, we started at the University of Pittsburgh. So for those of you who are new, Apollo is a device. Some folks are wearing it on their wrist. I'm wearing mine on my chest. And what Apollo does is it sends these low frequency vibrations to the body that help regulate the nervous system. So when we talk about heart rate variability, helping with sleep, helping with stress management during the day, Apollo is supporting your body's recovery from stress by essentially sending a safety signal to your brain that sends a safety cascade through your body. And what people notice is that they breathe a little slower, their heart rate comes down. And when you're less stressed during the day and able to manage things more effectively, you get better sleep at night. And then it's a positive reinforcement loop. So that's how we support recovery, both by supporting your recovery from strain, but also helping regulate circadian balance. And so to your question about how I think about the product, so we started at the University of Pittsburgh in the lab, and we never had any intention of starting a company. We were just working on a therapy to see if these waveforms would actually help the body respond to stress. And so what we found in our first trial, when we had people do this, as a double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover at the university, but what we had them do was have a stress task and then use the stimulation. And what we found is when they used the stimulation, that their heart rate variability improved, as their resting heart rate came down, they did better. But actually, funny story, OURA Ring actually helped us show that this translates in the real world. So when we were going to do a sleep lab trial in 2020, all the sleep labs closed because it was March of 2020. And so we actually did research with the OURA Ring, where customers of ours who had OURA Ring baseline data long before they introduced Apollo, we actually looked at what happened in the real world to see basically how would use of the product change their physiology over time, or would it stop working? What would happen? And what we actually found, thanks to the data that we were able to glean from our customers who also had an OURA Ring, was that in fact, using Apollo consistently actually helped make the effect more durable and that as people used it more and more, they actually sensitized to it, meaning it worked better for them. And so for us, there is actually a really beautiful alignment, which is very rare with technology, that using, as you know, right, we thankfully both work for companies that have created technology that helps us feel better, right? Ultimately, using Apollo consistently actually helps improve people's well-being, and the consistency is really key. And what I really enjoyed about our conversation when we were getting to know each other before the webinar, was that, the way you've described that you use Apollo. So you described it to me as a time where you use this device, and it is both, one, as you mentioned, supporting your recovery, because that's what we showed in that study, is that using Apollo consistently gives you the benefits of meditation. But also you used it as a mindful moment, as this pairing of a remembering to take a pause. And those two things combined, support for your body, but also that intention and that support to maintain a practice of recovery, is when you start to see these durable effects, where you start to see heart rate variability shift, sleep get more consistent, deep sleep improve. And so, I think it's a really exciting time because we get to pair measurement tools like OURA that provide really valuable insights with tools like the Apollo that can be used to support your body's recovery, in combination with everything else that we know to do, right? Like exercise and eating right and all the things that we need to do. But one of the things you're pointing out that you pointed out and Dr. Halland pointed out is that habit change, maintenance consistency, is true across all of it, right? It's like, it is true across all of it. Like if you're wearing your OURA ring every day, you've made a commitment to yourself that you're going to check in with your health. If we're wearing your Apollo, you have this thing that's supporting you throughout the day. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk to Dr. Axe about was really, like, there are a gazillion things to do, right? There's wearables, and there's nutrition, and there's exercise, and then there's cold plunge, and there's red light therapy, and there's like everything. You've been in the wellness industry a long time. You and I both know there's a lot of stuff. So you often say major on majors. And so I wanted you to unpack that a little bit. What advice do you give people when they're trying to manage stress so that they don't end up stressing themselves out while they try to manage it?
Yeah, and early in my career when I ran a functional medicine practice, I experienced this. Is sometimes, and Dr. Halland, I know you've experienced this too. Patients and clients get so obsessed with the numbers or doing their diet perfectly that it creates this cycle of stress that actually interferes with the results they're getting from maybe eating healthy or finally exercising or whatever good habit that they're implementing. And so, yeah, I always taught my patients major on majors. I'll give you an example of this too. Today I was doing a live and a Q&A on Instagram, and I was just sharing with people. Somebody asked me a question related to this. They said, I'm just getting started and I don't think I can change my whole diet. And I said, just change breakfast. Because sometimes even those minor changes, I mean, that's 1/3 of your diet if you're just changing breakfast for most people. So these can be really big shifts. And so touching on the majors for me, I think for the most part, diet is, of course, is going to be on there, stress and sleep and movement. I mean, those are all things that are absolutely critical. And one of the things that I've taught for many years to my patients is this idea of, and again, Dr. Halland, I think you're going to resonate with this. And by the way, I enjoy learning about you both. I am becoming more familiar with everyone's work here, but really looking at cellular regeneration. Today there's an onslaught of toxins and stress and lack of sleep that really interferes with our cells and our mitochondria. And so there's a lot of terms. And Dr. Halland, if we had a couple hours here, I'd actually to talk about, mTOR and AMPK and sirtuins and everything else. So, but all that being said, we want to start to create cellular regeneration. Well, one of the most important things, if you study Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, is I remember one of my first appointments with an acupuncturist. He goes, it was this amazing man from China who lives in Nashville, where I'm from. And he said, he goes, your battery is at 2.5. If you have 5 bars, you're at 2.5. And I thought it was a really good example. And if you have a lot of stress, and I think it's a good thing for everyone to think about. Your body has five lines, like on your phone, of battery. Where are you at? Because if you're at 1 or 2, if you're very low, your body literally does not have the energy, whether it be via the adrenals or the cells and the mitochondria, in order to repair and heal itself. And so it really is critical that we start to build up that battery. I would argue the top two ways to do that is get better sleep and reduce stress. I mean, I actually think it's even more important than diet. As I've traveled around the world and studied diet, I've seen people who have eaten very, very poor diets and ended up living a long time. And I would say that I think that serious stress and lack of sleep can be at least equally as damaging, and oftentimes even more. And so I would really say that for people to really focus on, and here's the thing, you don't need to do 10 things in each category. You know, diet-wise, I tend to recommend lots of vegetables, lots of berries, lots of wild organic meat. Like if you can get a lot of those, you're typically going to heal. You know, try and get 8 hours of quality of sleep a night. And then, by the way, I've been using OURA Ring for years. I was one of the first users, and you know, it really changed my sleep. And I really started also looking at things like looking at, you know, REM sleep, also looking at the deep sleep to see how well my, really more of my, you know, my muscles are recovering, also my nervous system's recovering. And so that was such an amazing app. And then I'm a more recent user of Apollo, but been just blown away on how my body just starts to get, you know, and this is why I think syncing these two devices is so powerful, being able to look at the impact that Apollo had on my HRV and my quality of sleep at night. And so it's really, really just such an amazing combo. And I think the ease of use is fantastic. But anyways, all that being said, yeah, major on majors. Again, you know, eat those healthy foods I mentioned, get better sleep, lower stress with just those two devices is a great way to do that. And get out and move. Even just walking, we're seeing now has tremendous benefits, even if it's just a 15 to 20-minute walk a day. So yeah, major on majors.
Yeah, and it's funny when you're talking about the battery, because the battery to me, Shyamal, sounds a whole lot like readiness, which, you know, when we were doing, and you guys have done like some very cool science, you know, and even during the pandemic, you know, people were using heart rate variability as an indicator as to whether or not people were likely to succumb to COVID, right, to get sick, or were coming down with COVID. And it's because of this body battery concept, right? Like when you start to see that heart rate variability, which is the amount and frequency with which your heart rate changes with the environment. And so you want high heart rate variability because it means that your body is resilient and you are adaptable. And if some lion showed up in my window, I would run the other way, but afterwards I'd come back down. And so when you don't get good sleep and when you are chronically stressed out, meaning like you're running from thing to thing and you don't take a moment to pause and help your body restore itself, whether that's through mindfulness, using Apollo, taking a walk, if you don't give yourself that restoration time, then when the next big stressor comes, you can't handle it, because it's just like if I tried to do a video call, well, I had 2% on my computer, it wouldn't last very long. Conversation would be cut short. And so, you know, when I think about that battery, I think a whole lot about how do you preserve the battery and how do you stack it back up, and sleep and recovery from stress are really, really important on those fronts.
Yeah, that's a great, you know, way to think about the battery sort of analogy. I would think like, you know, readiness is sort of the idea of like, you know, the short-term battery. I don't know if you can have concepts where you think about your battery or capacity in the short-term basis, and resilience is sort of how you would think about as a sort of a longer-term window into, you know, your overall sort of capacity to deal with stress. One of the things that I'm really, you know, I think about when I think about sort of this idea of, you know, proactive, personalized health, you know, management, I think about it like there are three, it's like a three-legged stool. One is, you know, one leg is information, right? Data and all the things that you can capture, like Dr. Halland, you talked about, you know, molecular biomarkers. And today we have access to, you know, all of these technologies. So we can get a really, really, you know, multidimensional, comprehensive view into our health. So that's one stool, one leg. The second one is insights. Like, how do you connect the dots between all of these data streams to understand what does this mean for you, right? Where are you in your health journey, right? And what are the things that you might need to focus on? And then the third one is interventions. And, you know, when I think about interventions, it's like Apollo, right? Sort of my experience of stress is being connected to an intervention that is going to dynamically sort of change and adapt, and you know, it all happens kind of seamlessly, right? Which is, I feel like that's really the holistic experience of kind of having those proactive interventions and changes that are happening that are just shifting you, right? And to me, that connects really well with this idea of longevity or health span, right? For me, like things that you're doing on a daily basis, your sleep, how active you are, what you're eating, these are all like things that will help you feel better and more, less stressed and be able to tackle your, day and life better in the short term. But they're also like adding up to your health span and how you will age and how your later years might look like. So it's really, really powerful. And this is the part that I really get excited about, and the role that the tools and technologies that we are building in this space and what that might unlock. So Kathryn, one thing I've been wondering as I've been using Apollo is like, what do you see, this type of, integrated approach, right, evolving? And there's lots of exciting things happening on the technology side, AI and access to other data streams. And I'm just curious how you're thinking about what the future holds for us here.
Well, I think we're starting, right? And it's these integration of therapies with measurement in a closed loop, right? So with OURA Ring, just as an example, Apollo is intaking OURA Ring data for customers who link them together to understand someone's readiness, their stress, so that we can generate Apollo vibes for them throughout the day. So for instance, rather than just saying like you need to sleep better, right? We will say, okay, we know that you didn't sleep very well, and we see that you look like you may be under more strain than usual. We're going to adjust this thing for you. We're going to adjust the vibes and when they turn on to support your recovery from stress. And I see this closed loop as where we have feedback and then intervention as being a touchstone, right? It's a touchstone in our improvement of health. It's about integrating both awareness, right? Awareness of the insight of the things we need to focus on, and then the interaction to support the body's recovery, right? Or with, Smart Vibes for Sleep, we have algorithm. This is independent of OURA, but this is an algorithm we have on our own device that knows when you're going to wake up in the middle of the night. It predicts when you're going to wake up in the middle of the night, and it turns Apollo on automatically to help you sleep through the night, which has been a complete game changer for me because I regularly wake up at 2 a.m. and I don't anymore, right? Like Apollo knows that I'm getting restless and it turns on this very soothing vibration. I don't notice it and I just sleep through the night. And these tools are very simple, right? They're simple, and I mean, clearly not simple to build, as you know, on the back end, but simple for the customer, simple for the person experiencing it. And so if we can use technology to solve problems for us, then we can help support and make the other bit easier. And I think the other element of it really is there, you pointed it out, and Dr. Halland also pointed this out. There's so much information now, right? There's so much information about, how that we can take from understanding our blood and, our diet and our cardiovascular metrics. But the really interesting thing that I think is important to unlock to make all of this work is really in supporting people making the changes to behavior. And the reason I say that is you can use Apollo and it'll help you sleep. But if you use Apollo consistently, you're going to start to see durable effects, right? You're going to see that you feel calmer during the day. You're going to notice that you sleep better at night. Likewise, if you start to change your diet, if you just eat well a couple of days, you might notice that you feel a little better those days. But if you don't keep it up, it's not adding to this piggy bank, right? And so when I think about like health span is a pretty delayed gratification thing, right? And some of the most successful people really know delayed gratification. Like, I'm going to work at something, I'm going to pace myself, and in the end, there will be a reward. I'm going to graduate from this program. I'm going to get this job. I'm going to do this. I'm going to save money. I'm going to buy this house. Whatever it is, if you delay gratification. But with health, we become really impatient, right? Like, I think that's why they call patience. They're asking you to be patient, and most of us aren't, right? Like, we want to sleep, don't want to be so stressed, we want to feel better, we want to lose weight, we want to do all the things. And so Dr. Halland, in your practice, you use a lot of this data to help really understand a baseline for people. But how do you encourage them, and how do you help them keep up with it, to maintain the practices so that it really can contribute to the health span piggy bank?
Yes, the big thing that we always focus on small wins equal big wins. And so sometimes when you're trying to change something in someone's health, people feel overwhelmed because there's so many things to attack, right? Whether it's their sleep, their diet, maybe it's energy levels, focus, and concentration. So I think I'm a very big believer in just stacking. And so I think one of the premise, again, it's about awareness. Having wearables brings about that awareness because let's say you're not someone who knows how to meditate or it's very difficult for you. It's nice that Apollo, for example, can just kick in based off of what it's getting feedback from Oura Ring. And I think that's such a unique integration because, again, sometimes if we can't do it on our own, having that assistive device, aka wearables, is one step in bringing in this longevity routine. And I think the big thing is also knowledge, right? When you have the knowledge on and you have your why, a lot of people don't do the health things because they don't have a why. And I think this kind of awareness with the data and the things that you can track help people get that stack set up. And so I think it all starts with fundamentals. I think at this point, right now, we're talking about the fundamental of stress and sleep. Those are so hugely underrated, right? I think we're so used to dealing with stress that we just don't worry about it. And culturally, I think back in the days, it was cool to like sleep less. Now it's like cool to sleep more. I mean, I know when I was in med school, like sleeping less was like, oh, if you slept too much, it was like weakness. Now sleeping more is a sign of strength. And it is for strength, right? Your immune system, your body's ability to heal. Now the data supports it. We're now into methylation and how methylation scores, which is your epigenetics, genes turning on, genes turning off. You can literally affect how your DNA works by managing stress and tracking your sleep and using wearables. So I think that's the huge part about it. It's really making the simple things simple and just being consistent. I think that's the hardest part.
Mhm. So when it comes to like health span, longevity, I like to think in the analogy I think about is financial planning, right? Sort of thinking about like what you're setting some goals and targets and then saying, okay, how am I kind of tracking against those goals? I've been thinking like, is there a way for us to, kind of do that for our health, right? Thinking it's very easy to think about our health in the shorter term, how I'm sleeping, how stressed I am, and how should I manage it. Those things are connected with their longevity and health span, but it's sometimes harder to sort of articulate like what does that, I am doing all these things, I'm making all these changes in my life. What do they add up to? And painting that picture. I came across a paper that was published in August 2023. And the paper was talking about sort of longevity biomarkers, right? Biomarkers that tell us something about, and I think there's a lot of exciting stuff. I would love to hear, more from you in terms of what you're looking at when you think about longevity from a biomarker perspective. And then also like, are there particular biomarkers that you're really excited about and where you see that potential and are you bringing that into your practice and, with people that you work with, right?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a few questions in there. And so I think I'll start off with the first one. It's the hard part with anything. Like when you're healthy, you don't really notice you're not healthy. You really just only, the moment you're unhealthy, it's like, okay, now I'm paying attention. But there's that kind of big gap, right? You're not like just diabetic one day, you're pre-diabetic, right? And this is very much ties into a lot of the work that Dr. Axe does with nutrition and supplementation. But that gap, it's kind of what I think is the awareness part. And so one, consistency. And then two, I think that is where the longevity markers come into play because that's kind of measuring the things that are in between, right? In the beginning, we used to know about telomeres. And obviously telomeres is that, if everyone doesn't know it, it's that end cap on your DNA. But, can we really track what disease comes about when you have short telomeres? It's really more the idea and the concept, okay, if I do things to make sure my telomeres don't get short, well, then that at least gives me some insight I'm healthy. And actually stress and stress management was actually one of the biggest key factors in maintaining good telomere length, right? Through meditation and breath work, stuff like that, not just like these new supplements, right? And then the other aspect, one of the biomarkers I'm super excited about is methylation. So there's a company called True Age made by True Diagnostics. You can actually measure things in your body, which is your DNA markers. And so we have your biological age and your chronological age, right? So chronologically, you might be this number, but biologically, you could be much younger. Like for example, when I did my True Age, there was a differential of over 15 years. So my immune system was much younger than my actual chronological age. And that's probably from a healthy lifestyle, maybe sleeping well, and it wasn't always like that. I'm sure at some point my biological age was worse than my chronological age in med school, sleeping 4 hours a day, chronically stressed, doing a test every week, so I think methylation is one of the biggest interesting things that are out there right now because it's a relatively simple test. You can do it at home. It's just a blood spot card, and you can learn a lot. And I think the other thing about when we talk about aging, I like to think about cellular aging. So the concept of longevity medicine is really becoming cellular. Just like how personalized medicine came into the scene, I think cellular medicine is the next frontier. We have functional medicine, regenerative medicine, which is kind of how your body, stem cells, immune system works. And now we're going to cellular medicine. And so cellular medicine is one of the reasons why I think things like Apollo work because it's working on vibrations and frequencies. And so our body can sense that, right? So how is it sensing it? It must be working on a cellular level, right? So when you can decrease inflammation in the body, aging is a function of inflammation. That's why there's this term called inflammaging. So I think that's where this is all tying into when we think about the next generation of testing, which is why you have to see more of a functional medicine practitioner. These things aren't taught in school. I mean, nutrition was a 1 week course when I was in med school. Not to date, how old I am, but Google just came out when I was in med school. So it's a very different generation now. When you think about, we search for everything. I call it Dr. Google, but I think consumers are more empowered because there's so much knowledge. The harder part now is to find, filtering out what's the good knowledge, what's the knowledge that applies to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I've heard that are really common themes. So like body battery and resilience, right? Like you're supporting your recovery from stress using Apollo, meditating, eating right. And then over a period of time, these things are maintaining that battery level, which is maintaining your cellular function and your mitochondrial function, right? Because you're not exhausting yourself over and over. Like, think about it like a computer. If you let the thing die over and over and over and over again and you never plug it in, then eventually the battery stops working, right? I know we're not machines, but to make an analogy, right? So if your sleep is dysregulated and I was also of the rise and grind generation. So Halland, I'm completely with you. I actually said the sentence, I'll sleep when I'm dead when I was younger and significantly more foolish, right? Like sleep is the thing that keeps you going, right? And so, I just think it's really interesting when you think about cellular function, epigenetics, health span. It's really about maintenance of yourself, right? And it's getting the good sleep and it's eating well and it's moving. And they aren't major steps. It can feel overwhelming, but I think with behavior change, it's like starting someplace and then making these incremental shifts actually gets easier and easier as you feel more well. Right. And that was actually one of the main impetuses when we were coming up with Apollo, because we were dealing with patients who had chronic stress related conditions. And so we were looking for a way to help them feel safe and calmer in their bodies because remembering to meditate was really hard if you're under chronic stress, right? Like getting good sleep when you're ruminating all the time and doing the practice to actually stop that rumination cycle is very challenging when you're in this fight or flight state. And so by supporting the body into a recovery state, by helping the body feel calmer, it makes all of those things more attainable and easier. So I learned a lot here, and I would love to do a take two where we can just dive into methylation and epigenetics because I'll geek out, and I'm sure Dr. Dave, my co-founder, would geek out as well. We have about 10 minutes left. So I'm wondering if we want to start taking some questions from the audience. Sound good?
Yeah.
So, okay. So these are two questions that kind of go together. So the first one was asking about how to use Apollo and OURA together. Apollo itself, on its own, and because there was another question about this, how does Apollo work without OURA? So Apollo works without OURA because you then can choose which vibe you are going to play. So on mine, you can choose basically I think I'm on the social vibe right now. Yeah. And so you can use it this way, and you can also schedule which one of these programs turn on. So what I tend to do is will have a vibe that I use for different tasks. So right now I'm on the social vibe. Social vibe for me is fun, right? It's a little bit of fun. It's a little bit of bubbly. It helps me relax in social situations. Then I'll do like focus for butt in the chair work and that sort of thing. If you have smart vibes is our closed loop system. And closed loop means we take data from one place and then we use it to act. So I know, for instance, you're not sleeping. You look like you're going to wake up, and then I'm going to turn on automatically. That's closed loop, right? Take the data and act on it, and then learn and respond continually. And so without Aura, Apollo Smart Vibes knows based on your motion signatures when it looks like you're going to wake up in the middle of the night, and it turns on automatically to help you stay asleep. And so when you think about a little kid fussing into the crib and you see that they're about to wake up and you put your hand down, you go, oh no, shh. It's essentially what Apollo's doing. It knows that you're getting fussy, that you're going to wake up, and it turns on to help soothe you to sleep. With the Aura integration, what we're doing is we're pulling in Aura Ring data to understand your readiness level, your stress level, to understand how well your body's responding. And so we're pulling in data like the sleep quality as it's reported by the Aura Ring, your readiness score, so a lot about your heart rate variability and how recovered you are, which we've talked a lot about is really important. And then we will then generate vibes for the day that will turn on automatically throughout the day for you. So if we see, for instance, that you slept really well and that your HRV is good, we're going to be like, great, we're going to send you some vibes during the day to just keep it up on recovery from exercise or focus during the day or helping you just keep it up. But if we see, okay, your sleep's not so great and it looks like you're pretty stressed, we might send you more recovery vibes, more vibes to help support your recovery from stress and to help bounce you back up, because life is life, and the stress, you can't just always, take a flight to Mexico and go on vacation, right? You have to continue on with your life and your family and your work. And so Apollo's there to meet you there and to help support your body's recovery from strain. Okay. And then this one, I think I'm going to ask Dr. Halland, what is the importance of midpoint of sleep aligned with chronotype? So I get asked this stuff all the time about chronotypes and sleeping to your chronotypes. What is the importance of aligning your sleep to your chronotype? What do you think about it?
Sure, I think that's great. And that's from Dr. Michael Brace's work, where it's like, what's your sleep chronotype, right? You're a bear, a lion, a dolphin, and I think an owl might have been one. And essentially, your sleep chronotype is, when do you preferably like to go to bed and when do you like to wake up? So when we kind of go into sleep theory, it's about, the most important thing about sleep hygiene is sleep consistency, consistent bedtime and wake up time, right? And so I think it's super important to actually look at your Oura Ring scores, because I've actually done this. I used to be a night owl. I lived in, Miami, Florida. It's a late night culture, and then New York City, and then I lived in California, where everyone wants to go to bed early, wake up early. So I've done different sleep chronotypes, and so I think the idea of looking at your Oura Ring, for me in particular, I notice that I get more deep sleep when I'm actually sleeping to my sleep chronotype. And that's a big deal for me, because deep sleep, for a brain function level, your brain clears out all the toxins, right, through these things called your lymphatics. So those are the things that can predispose you to Alzheimer's or dementia, right? So deep sleep is your body's not only cleansing mechanism, it's your body's healing mechanism. So if you're, let's say you're a night owl, but you're trying to be a morning bird, but you don't get enough deep sleep, then don't force it. I think you should sleep according to your sleep chronotype, because you're not going to squish that square peg in that round hole. And now you have a real measurable data. And so I see it particularly in my data, like, for example, with Oura Ring, like, I'll sleep deep sleep, like I'm out for an hour straight, just all deep sleep if I go to my sleep chronotype. But then if I try to force it, there's a lot of wake up periods, because I'm in an unnatural sleep pattern. And so we all have a circadian rhythm. And so really, you're now using the data to support that circadian rhythm.
I just want to add one more thing here. There's also a lot of science emerging showing how, your alignment with your, chronotype, your circadian rhythm has an impact on, long-term risks for developing diseases, short-term as well. Even things like when you take, when you're sick or something, you might get prescribed some medications, and you would like, one in the morning, one in the night. That's a very standard prescription. There is science that's showing that if you take your medications that are aligned with your circadian sort of phase, like when is the right time for you in the day, you can have, the medications can be more effective. So this is an area that I'm really, really excited about, and I feel like we're just starting to scratch the surface of like what might be ways in which we would want to change some of our behaviors to align better with our circadian rhythm and chronotype.
Yeah, and when you talk about changing the behavior to align with the chronotype and well-being, one of the things that I notice a lot of people report to me when they first started using the OURA ring, which is my own personal experience, what is that we notice timing of dinner and timing of alcohol makes enormous difference on sleep quality, duration, heart rate variability. Right? So if you drink alcohol, and it's different for people, right? But generally, like eating a late meal or drinking alcohol right before bed tend to really reduce sleep quality. So I wanted to ask you, Dr. Axe, like when you're talking to your patients, obviously you mentioned sleep and stress management are these core fundamentals, but food, right? Timing of food, amount of food, kind of food, has a huge impact on your ability to cope with stress, right? Because you eat certain things, you have your blood sugar spikes, you have, less insulin resistance, your heart rate variability tanks. So what advice do you give people about, the kinds of foods and how to eat to improve their sleep and manage their stress?
Yeah, generally the recommendation is one, if you're over consuming carbohydrates, that will definitely negatively impact the sleep. Of course, alcohol, as you mentioned, and part of it is, you're telling your body something when you eat certain foods. If you're really doing a lot of carbohydrates, your body is expecting to expend energy, and whether you go and run or you go to bed, it's going to expend it. And so this is why I was reading a study recently on sleep, and it was showing just the amount of people that sleep hot versus cold. And hot sleepers, that was the number one reason why people got poor quality sleep, was what woke them up at night was they said they would get too hot. And so it's really important that people regulate those body temperatures. And so typically before you want to finish, ideally, you want to eat and then give your body a 3-hour window before you then go and lay down. In Chinese medicine, they would also recommend you go and sleep on your left side. That brings more blood flow to the stomach and allows you to have better digestion. And so that's another tip. And then I've studied a lot of Asian and Chinese medicine. And the other thing they would recommend is taking 1,000 steps after a meal. So going for anywhere from a 10-minute to a 20-minute walk. I mean, so that's the ideal, eating earlier, doing more low carbohydrate, lots of meat, healthy fats, vegetables. And then, getting a little bit of movement. You don't want to exercise, but you want to walk right after that. And ideally, while the sun is going down, to kind of reset your circadian rhythms. And if you can do that, it'll be really beneficial. And I just want to say this about sleep. I mean, I think everybody here knows this, but it's just, when you look at the data, there's this point where if you don't get a certain amount of sleep, your body gets in a disease state. For instance, less than 7 hours, your likelihood of obesity, cancer, heart disease, and a short-term immune issue, they rise significantly.
Interesting. You mentioned taking a walk. I think there are some cultures in which this is kind of a part of like in Italy, this is called passeggiata, where you kind of take a stroll through the town after in the evening. And actually, one of the first things I learned about, I used a CGM a few months back for a couple of weeks, and just the change you see in your blood glucose response if you're going for a walk after a meal versus just sitting, it was so dramatic that it just made me this is something that I've built into my routine now, just taking a short walk after dinner.
Yeah, and from the OURA ring information, like right out the gate, was I had a very different, I am Italian, and the eating pasta and drinking a glass of red wine, not so awesome for my heart rate variability and not so awesome for my sleep. And so that's kind of the opportunity that you have when you get the information and a tool to help support your recovery, like an OURA ring or an Apollo. Is it gives you this understanding of, there are these things that happen when I have certain behaviors that inhibit my goals, right? Like if I just change these few little things, I can actually sleep a whole lot better and feel a whole lot better the next day. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity to really contextualize the stuff that can seem overwhelming otherwise.
Yeah, I wanted to mention this too, Kathryn. And this is something that both Dr. Halland and Patel started off with, and they use the word awareness. And I think that if we want to grow and get better in anything in life, awareness is so key, whether it be spiritual awareness, whether it be relational awareness, understanding how someone else feels, and of course, physiological awareness, as we're talking about. And so I think that's one of the things that's so powerful for even me personally, as I started using OURA and Apollo, is I just really became much more aware of my own body. And this is just empowering for anybody to be able to become more aware. So anyways, again, I'm a huge fan of Apollo, huge fan of OURA, use them regularly. And so, and it's been a pleasure being on today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this has been a very fascinating conversation. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys. Okay. But I want to thank everybody for their time. And I also want to let you know that we'll do our best to answer any questions. There's a bunch left in the chat. We'll do our best to answer those questions. And we will have a recording of this webinar available for everyone who registered. So we'll send out the recording. But I really had a really great time talking to all three of you. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to share this information with our audience. And thanks for everybody who participated and who asked such thoughtful questions. And with that, I think I'm going to conclude and thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a
Pleasure.
great day, guys. Bye.